Welcome to everybody joining here today. We want to thank you for joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Kim Todd, Virtual Programs Manager here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. On behalf of the entire CCI team, we appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us. Today, we are really excited for a conversation with Rob Waldron and Raj Sisodia about leading with your core values and how a higher purpose drives conscious leadership. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of business, as well as a movement of business leaders from around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism as a means to elevate humanity. Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement by creating learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalists through our Senior Leader Network membership and engagement with our local chapters. Several times a month, we offer virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our network. A little bit about the format for today. We will run for about 45 minutes. Raj and Rob will be in conversation for about 25, and then we'll transition to audience questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session. We invite you to use the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get as many of your questions answered during our time together. If you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. Now I'm honored to welcome Raj Sisodia and Rob Waldron. Raj is the co-author of Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business. He's also a distinguished university professor of conscious enterprise and chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, and a CCI board member. Rob is the CEO of Curriculum Associates, and it's a company that is providing classroom support to a third of the K-8 students in the United States. Raj, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Rob, the CEO, and begin your conversation. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm delighted to be here with all of you attending today, and also with my good friend, Rob, I've known for quite a few years now. And Rob has spoken to my MBA class on conscious capitalism multiple times and always leaves the students incredibly inspired and impressed, with what he has been able to achieve. As Kim said, his company, Curriculum Associates, is impacting literally a third of the middle schoolers in this country in a very positive way. It's not just about getting those high scores. So delighted to have this conversation with a highly, highly conscious leader. I've always been impressed every time I've met Rob, his clarity and his focus. And, you can see it's somebody who has achieved mastery of some level. That you see the simplicity on the other side. The game kind of slows down for leaders like that, I feel. So Rob joined Curriculum Associates in 2008. He got his MBA at Harvard Business School, I believe in 1992, after being at Northwestern. And I think has worked in a series of companies in the education space, starting with Kaplan. We'll get into that, but has become really one of the leaders in that whole world and has been recognized as such by multiple outlets like Fast Company, who named him the top 25 social entrepreneur, as the World Economic Forum, Young Global Leader, and Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year, as well as other honors from YPO and EdTech and so forth. So there's no shortage of accolades coming towards Rob, all well deserved. So Rob, welcome and thank you for being part of Conscious Capitalism and part of this event today.
Well, thanks, Raj. Great to see you. And then hopefully everybody will hear okay. I'm in a hotel in Chicago, having been with 200 educators, and I know you're on Cape Cod, so I think you got the better deal on this, but I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm sort of recharging a little bit this week while we're here before the crazy travel picks up again. So yeah, let's go back. I'm always interested in the backstory of how people become the conscious leaders that they are today. So if you could just talk a little bit about your early life, before you entered a profession, and then into your career, and how you were kind of nudged, I think, towards your true calling right? So if you could share some of your journey with us.
Yeah, sure. So I guess service started at birth a little bit. I was my father was in the Peace Corps, and I think I'm the first child born to a Peace Corps representative, according to a few people. So
Oh, wow.
that was I don't want to tell you how long ago that was, but parents got divorced, and then my mother actually, I know this sounds a little crazy, but remarried the local Catholic priest. He had left the priesthood, married my mother, and so I was actually raised in part by a priest, and so I kind of had, and she had become a teacher, so I had some of that service stuff in my genes. And I guess the biggest moment probably came where I was a little bit more clear wanting to do this kind of work that you've written about is when I worked at Morgan Stanley when I graduated Northwestern, and I had that little sign that said "kick me" on the back, where you kind of worked those kids until midnight or whatever. But one of the things I did is I volunteered at a homeless shelter for kids. It was only 8 blocks away, called Covenant House, and this was in the middle of the crack epidemic in the late 80s in New York City, and just was so struck at all the things going on in one area at Morgan Stanley, where I was with what were called then by different authors, masters of the universe, and running the economy and that kind of thing. And 8 blocks away would be with homeless children. Those 2 words in America shouldn't exist. And was really struck on why we couldn't put the great work of capitalism to solve social problems. I actually wrote my essay to get into business school. I don't know if I was as forward thinking as it sounds. I was just trying to get in, but really thinking about why can't we apply some of these principles to service and serving people in need, and as it turns out, I had a career in it.
Wow. So you go to Harvard and you come out, and then, unlike most of your classmates, many of whom I think go on to investment banking or consulting, right? That's probably the first 2. What was your first role out of Harvard? Was it Kaplan?
Yeah, so I worked at a place called Kaplan, and I was in their main business, which was the MCAT, GMAT, GRE preparation. But right away, we were already in my first year or 2 starting to think about other education companies or whatever, and I got involved in helping acquire a company out in California. It was called Score Learning Centers, that did after-school tutoring. So when I was 29, I went out to run that out of San Francisco. That was owned by the Washington Post company, and it was Sean Kaplan, and that grew to from kind of a $2 million organization to $50 million organization over the 4 or 5 years, but really at that point I'd had a daughter and knew I wanted to do public service at some point in my life, and I ended up getting recruited to run a nonprofit. And I think this is an interesting part of the story. I run a nonprofit called Jumpstart, which worked with 3 to 5-year-old children in Head Starts and other low-income preschools, and recognize the difference of, like, every night I had to go to dinner and ask people for money and that kind of thing, and do the Robin Hood thing, and make sure, the legal Robin Hood thing, legally bring assets to folks in poverty, and we got to 15,000 kids in that way, running a nonprofit, and that felt good and gratifying. But I could tell the for-profit side was a better way to do that. And if you think about, I'm the same guy, I work just as hard, I'm trying to serve people, and at that time we served 15,000 kids, and now that I run a for-profit company, same guy, same ethos, everything, we serve 11 million kids. So it's that shows the power of what happens if you can make it a for-profit company that attracts capital and still have the conscious leadership that you've written about in your books.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important part of what we talk about in conscious capitalism, right? We have this artificial separation between nonprofits who do virtuous work in the world, and then businesses who we view as self-interested only. and any virtue that happens is incidental. But I think this idea of combining the ethos and the mindset that nonprofits operate with the higher purpose and the values, and an attempt to make a positive difference in the world, and to actually marry that to a viable business model, allows you to scale caring and scale goodness in the world way beyond what most nonprofits are able to. And I think that's a wonderful part of this story.
And I would say, Raj, in our business model, which has kind of shifted in the world of publishing old, you know, I don't know if you recall when you got a textbook when you were younger and you would write your name in pencil, and then the kid the next year write their name in pencil, and you kind of keep it for 6 or 8 years or whatever. Now that people, among other things, are selling software, and that's a big part of the work, they have to subscribe every year, and only if we delight schools and we get great gains for kids are they going to keep subscribing every year. And you know, that shifted the business model, which requires us to produce excellence, or they just leave us. That you can't, and you know, we can't afford to be spending the $125 million our company does on R&D every year unless they stay, unless our educators and customers stay. And what's nice is that the business model is now tied directly to what they need, which is, you know, outcomes for kids, saving time for teachers, and so forth.
Yeah, so we're going to get into what Curriculum Associates does in a minute. But before that, I want to see if was there any particular experience? I know you volunteered at Covenant House, but something that kind of set you on this pathway, this higher purpose pathway. Was there a particular moment that you recall, an awakening or an epiphany? Or
yeah, I had, you know, it's probably too much information for this kind of thing, but I had an unexpected drunk driving incident with my brother where he died unexpectedly. He was 10 years younger than me, but he was a senior in college. And, you know, I just had one of those moments of, understanding as all those things are happening, like a bit of a spiritual moment where I just decided that I would lead a life of 100% integrity, and that I would make, I was on that journey before, but make my life about the purpose that I could, in ways that I could give. And, you know, Jim Collins, talks about like, what's that bug meant to do, and, you know, when I thought a lot about that question, that this bug is meant to run a for-profit ed tech company that actually makes a difference to kids, particularly kids who are marginalized, Black and brown kids who have, all sorts of different identities, but also kids in poverty, and which is principally who we serve. To me, that's been very fulfilling.
Yeah, so let's talk about Curriculum Associates. So you joined them in 2008. And if you could tell us a bit about what the company does, and also the very interesting founder who you worked with over there, and his philosophy on business.
Yeah. So, well, just real quickly on the company, we make both online assessment, online instruction, and print-based instruction, reading and math, principally kindergarten through 8th grade. So when I started, we were just 100 people. We have 2,000 people today. All that's just organic growth, and really just focused on finding the most talented, passionate people in the world, and letting them loose on these very difficult problems that are in education. And in terms of Frank Ferguson, the founder, he was an original investor in 1969. So I took over a 40-year-old company. It was it had the interesting, because it's the thesis of all your books, the value was $13 million in terms of the valuation at the time. And he did a couple things that were pretty unusual. The first thing is that in order for me to get some ownership in my company, he required that I sign up for 20 years. So I have a 20-year employment agreement. I have 6 years left, so wish me luck. And he actually stayed with the company. He let me run it completely, but until he was 91, he was with us kind of full-time as a statesperson, and passed away a year and a half ago at 94. And so if I'm here, as long as Frank was here, I'll be running this company at 2057. But And then the other thing he did is he actually gave the majority of the company, which was his part, away to Iowa State, where he went to school, met his wife, and grew up in Ames, Iowa, and to the Boston Foundation, which is back in community foundation back in Boston. So it was actually one of the 10 largest gifts given in the United States, 2017, and just an extraordinary thing, just to kind of just give the company away. And my job will be to find the person who in 6 years who can run it for another 20 and try to keep it independent. But anyway, along the way, we do have outside investors now, as companies do it, and in part to build the buildings in Iowa State and give to educational causes in Boston and so forth.
Wow. And so tell us again the purpose. So you're trying to help these kids catch up. You're trying
So we're trying to make classrooms better places for teachers and students. And the thing that's happened is that teachers have very difficult jobs because they might have 3 to 4 to 5 different grade levels in the same classroom. And how can we use technology and other resources and curriculum and data and knowledge in order to get them the content that they need and make that classroom a lot more efficient, so that the teacher has more time, instead of gathering information on assessment all the time, has more time to deliver an instruction and be with students. And so, we are hired by districts to make it so that data comes alive and they can make better choices, and to increase student achievement and scores and whatever else they're trying to achieve. And so, we've had a great history and some really good research that suggests that, proves actually that, we are having that impact.
Long-term impact on these kids, yeah. And it's customized, right? So each kid gets the information in a way that's tailored to where they are.
Totally, yeah. So we have both, we do both for the classrooms now. So we have content that's personalized to each individual student based on their particular needs. We have we help group kids in small groups to figure out kids who have similar needs. So the teacher, particularly in elementary school these days, might be breaking up into 4 or 5 groups, and teachers working with subgroups and aides and so forth. And then we do also make the classroom content, so the math curriculum that a 3rd grader would get all year. And then the thing is that's different is it's all tied together, so that when you do the lesson, we actually know which prerequisite skills that children might need to be ready for that lesson, which has been super helpful during this COVID crisis. And also, at the end of the year, what was growth? Not just is the kid going to pass the state test, but can we show growth for the kids who are more behind, but also the kids who are ahead that might not be being paid attention to because they passed the state test the prior year, but are we showing growth? And so there's been a ton of statistical data on that. So probably have the best data set on education in the United States.
Wow. And so under your leadership, this company has grown about 20-fold in terms of employees.
Yep. So, to catch up, without the valuation was 13 million. There was no investment. We just grew organically, and again, the valuations of transactions, things happened over in this last year. This year is over 5 billion.
Oh, wow.
And so there's in January I did it. It was a 61,111% increase in value. Yeah. So
wow.
And I would say that the things that you've talked about for a long time, I didn't go about this to try to goose the stock price, but these principles, the do what's best, treat people with respect, be a great employer, the community engagement, other things, there's a relationship to our success, with shareholders, that they are one of the constituents. But, I would say that, there are 600,000 companies on Glassdoor. We're one of the top 100 companies of those 600,000 companies on Glassdoor. And you got to be careful because anybody can write anything on those things. You never know what they're going to say or go down. But, generally speaking, we're known as a great employer, been, Boston Globe's best places to work 8 years in a row. So there being a great employer led to the greatest shareholder return. make, we have the highest renewal rate, highest upsell rate in our industry as far as we know, and that's a signal that the educators really like what we have and think it's valuable, and like we do what's best for them first, and surprise, the shareholders got taken care of. So and the other thing is the long-term thinking, Raj, which you've talked a lot about. That's it would, when Frank first did this 20-year thing, I was frankly angry. I was like, what are you talking about? No one, he told me after I joined that I couldn't get any equity if I didn't stay for 20 years. I'm like, what? That's nonsense. But it turned out to be a great gift because it focused all of us and the management team to focus on a 20-year view. And it's the same 15-year march that Jim Collins talked about, and it really shifts you. If every decision you have to make, it's what's best for the next 15 to 20 years, and that again has been a great gift and a great competitive advantage.
Yeah, so the template, it does seem pretty straightforward, right? You have purpose, you got core values, and you attract people who passionately believe in those things, create a wonderful working environment for them. And then that leads to customer delight and customer retention and loyalty and so forth. And all of those things ultimately then lead to performance. And so I think this is a classic example of that. But it has to start with that clear vision of that clearly articulated purpose and those core values. And then the hiring process, if you can tell us a little bit. I know you've talked before, I think some of my students, I think I've sent your way. The hiring process and how you find the right people so that once you put them in their roles, they just shine.
Yeah. Well, I think, the first thing is I had an opportunity to meet a gentleman named Jeff Smart a long time ago. And he said something that just stuck with me for my career, which was, it's much easier to be an outstanding recruiter and an average manager than an average recruiter and an outstanding manager. Right. So let me say it again. It's much easier to be an outstanding recruiter and an average manager than a average recruiter and an outstanding manager. Right. So if you get the talent right first, and I took that to heart, and I decided I'm going to be an average manager. I really focused on who the talent was and evaluating the talent. So much so that for the first 13 of these 14 years or 12, 14 years, I continue to interview every single person in the company. I think in 2020, I had 438 interviews.
Wow.
And then eventually the recruiting team yelled at me like, I'm slowing it down too much and so forth. You can't get on my schedule. But I still do a lot of it, a couple hundred a year. And to me that, the thing is, the way the process worked in our company over time was the people who had, were evaluated for skills and experience, but kind of before I sat down with them, and among the roles that I had, and everybody was doing this, was to really test the values and the passion, and to make sure that we have, people who are humble, who are kind, who are, high confidence, low ego. And we focused on that. And it's amazing what a virtuous cycle that can be if you get people whose values are aligned. And a lot of people talk about our company's culture because we've won, best company culture, that kind of thing. We don't have one company culture. That's nonsense. The culture of the quality assurance team and the tech group is different than the culture of the people in the warehouse, which is different than the culture of the sales team. But we do have a common set of values, and the kinds of values that you've espoused in your books. People who believe in, we should probably, we used to call it servant leadership, but probably leaders who serve, to be more correct, and folks who want to do what's best for the world first and worry about themselves a little second. So because those values have existed and been there, I think we've all gotten along. And I'm a very different leader than Frank was, but we had a common set of values, and that's why it worked. In most cases, when some corporate suit like me comes in to take over for the entrepreneur, particularly one who's been around for 35 or 40 years, it blows up. And to me, I found that if the values are aligned, even if the methods about going left or going right, those decisions are different, then everything's going to work out.
So you point to a key challenge, I think, that conscious companies have over time. You've got the visionary founder with the core values deeply ingrained, and they create an organization in their image in a way of people who believe that way. And then often over time, in this case, I think they handled the first transition. Frank did very well, finding you and being able to judge after, I don't know how many times he met you, but that you were the right leader for the long run. And then making sure that there was values alignment. I think that cycle, very few companies have been able to keep that going over 3 or 4 transitions,
Yeah.
And inevitably there comes a time where there might be a dip in the market or for whatever reason, the company might be struggling. And then you go out and you hire, a so-called professional from the industry who will come in and use a playbook that is kind of the standard playbook.
Yeah.
Right. I think the gravity kind of pulls you towards the old operating model, and this all becomes about the numbers and bottom line and all of that. And I think you kind of lose your soul and you lose what makes that company special. And I think that,
well, you're making me totally uptight now. But yeah, I think that's true. But the question is I've been thinking a lot about this and how to make that so that doesn't occur with some transition in 5 to 10 years with me, and I worry deeply about it. But I will say, one of the things is, are your investors up for this? And I in our case, I feel very deeply that they are, and they, if you understand your investors' needs and how long term they can stay or not, and how they've behaved before, and do they understand that only if they allow these conscious principles to play will they get the best return and get those aligned. And I just to give you a short example of the lengths I go, without talking about any individual, there was a couple firms recently wanted to become a third investor with us, and I always think, well, how do I know that this person is kind and nice or whatever? And I thought to myself, well, the best place is youth sports, because that's where everybody misbehaves. So I found out where this kids went to school, and I networked, and I realized I had an old college friend that his kids went to the same school. So I made my old college friend, without saying anything, sit behind him, because I knew his son was a quarterback on the football team, and then just see how he behaved for the game. Turns out he's a very nice guy, and we didn't choose him as an investor, but that's the kind of thing, you got to know the investors' values too. And so that's really worked out for us. And we have people who are focused on doing the right thing first. And that, particularly with, when we had COVID issues and the, kind of the complications we've had in the curriculum space with all the debates people are having on cultural issues and winning or losing elections about which curriculum you have, and having people who are aligned is super important.
And I think that's a very, very critical point. In many companies, we pay a lot of attention to the right employees and the values and the purpose and customers. But very often when it comes to money, you take the highest valuation and what seems like the best deal and so forth, and that inevitably blows up over time. I've heard John Mackey describe investors like VCs and others like they're hitchhikers with credit cards. Right? And they get on and say, okay, we'll go as long as you're going in our direction, we'll pay for the gas.
Yeah.
But at some point, if there's a fork in the road and you want to go left and they want to go right, he said they'll leave you in the ditch, right? And take the car and go.
Yeah.
So I think that does happen, as we have seen with activist investors of a certain kind.
Yeah.
And others as well. So I think safeguarding that future of this enterprise on behalf of all of its stakeholders, so it doesn't lose its soul, I think that is one of the great challenges that we face. In terms of your own leadership, how did you become? I know you talked about your parents, the culture of service, Peace Corps, as well as teaching. But as a conscious leader, are there practices that you have? Are there things that you live by, principles? Are they, what do you do to develop yourself or grow yourself? What kinds of, how do you take care of your own most important stakeholder, which is you, so that you can be the kind of leader that makes such a difference?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm, the best case to highlight on those things. My tireless zeal for this work comes from, getting, feeling how important it is and for our team to succeed at the work and just to make classrooms better places for teachers and students. And I would say that because the work fills me up and it feels like my hobby. I don't have hobbies in some ways, and I'm super focused on all sorts of family things and work. And so maybe I don't do as many hobbies and other things because actually the work is the thing I want to do when I'm, when I have extra time. And so again, I'm not sure people are supposed to be like me, and I'm not recommending it, but that's a little bit how it works. I would say too that just stylistically, one thing that was helpful for me early on is when I first managed people, I recognized that I wasn't very good, and I had no idea what I was doing. And, I was sort of had that late 20s male filled with myself because I got an MBA nonsense. Mm-hmm. And then I got kind of nervous, like, oh, I better pay attention. And I ran across some folks. This is when I was at Kaplan, these two women, Gloria and Maria, and they weren't college educated or whatever. But I just basically, there's a long story, but I asked them what the heck I should do running this one little test prep center. Mm-hmm. And they gave me one idea after another. And it turned into this home run. And Raj, I didn't have a single original thought. And I just actually, in this case, I was scared. And now I try to keep the humility to really pay attention to what the great people who work here are saying, and like be their advocate and do what they say. And so I would, that sort of principle of like, why would I decide something when they're seeing it every day and so forth. And that's turned into a success factor. And, I just think great listening is part of being a conscious leader, because you're thinking about what various constituents want rather than being, boss man and saying, oh, I've done it before. Just as you say, this pattern recognition, we're going to do it this way again. I think that's a recipe for failure. So, frankly, getting comfortable with failure, which I know you've talked about with your students, where you just like, it's okay. You got to get up again and try again. And if you're not risking it, it's not worth trying.
Yeah. Well, I think you became a leader in the 90s. And this was the era of Jack Welch, right? I mean, Jack mm-hmm. Welch kind of defined the template in a way for corporate leadership in the US 80s and 90s, which was kind of the polar opposite of your approach. Did you have any thoughts about that? Where that was kind of the environment? I'm sure when you were at Harvard, you must have read multiple cases about Jack
Yeah, I mean,
Welch.
I just, I've met Jack Welch, but I'm not smart enough to tell people what to do every day. I mean, mm-hmm. It's that simple. Yeah. And so, I'm a great recruiter, and I'm going to let them decide. I just, to me, that works better. It's been, in the last few years when it's very hard to find talent and so forth, it's been helpful to have, reputationally be an organization who cares for employees rather than do it our way kind of thing. But those things will swing back and forth. And, to be frank and honest, I mean, there's many great companies where use a different style of leadership. Steve Jobs had a very different style of leadership, and he seemed to do okay. So whatever, this is what I know how to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. Kim, should we open it up to some questions? I see there are about 7 here on the
Yes, we do have some questions from participants. So let's move on in. Thanks, Rob and Raj, for that amazing conversation. We'll continue it now. Here is a question from Diane, who is saying, you now have investors in the company. Most private equity has a 5-year view on investments and is creating 25 to 30% IRRs. Where did you find investors that think long-term and understand the value of purpose and stakeholder orientation?
Yeah, so the first thing is that I found, not all of them, but some of the more successful private equity firms, they've had the same investors for a long time. We have one named Berkshire Partners, and I think 80 or 90% of their investors have been with them more than 15 years. And if they don't want all the money back right away, they got to find another great company to put it in. And so if they feel convinced that the company's doing well, they want to stay. I know that's true for Premier and Hellman and Freeman, our other 2 investors. And so, one is that they're out there, and they're kind of trying to shift their business models a little bit, particularly the successful ones, to think long-term. And there's different ways you can do it. Like you can, in Berkshire's case, they owned the majority of the company and then they sold part of the company. So their investors got a partial return and they see the, great success and then, want to stay. And then their investors want to stay too, because they're like, oh, I've already gotten my return. I'm kind of guaranteed in that way, but I still have some potential upside. So I think there's more out there than people say, but, there are some rules of, when I started these investors, you weren't allowed to sell stock in the company without my approval. That kind of changes the dynamic a little bit, but I think more people are thinking longer term now than they were in the past because they see that the returns have improved. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I think being very clear up front, like this is who we are. And I think it'll damage shareholders to not think long term. And finding people who agree with that or not, and referencing it and checking it out. But it's still there. It's not that it's not an exact overlap, but people have seen that companies who do these things right have great returns, and they're attracted to those great returns. And the other things that I talked about, you can check on people's character, the people you're going to be dealing with, as part of the reference process, and I think that's essential. And I'm pleased to report that the people that I've been working with have, particularly the individuals and that I work with from each of these firms they're people with great character.
Thanks for that. And to kind of follow up, a question from Eric, how is recruiting and selecting talent similar or different from recruiting and selecting investors?
That's an interesting question. It is pretty similar. And I came to it late where I realized like I am going to put these investors through the, same kind of process in terms of, background reference checking and all those things. But I think they're pretty similar. I mean, they're going to help shape and set the culture of your company. They have a hands-on approach or a hands-off approach, all the things. And so I think it's something to be super deliberate about.
Great. Another question that popped up, it kind of talks a little bit about, you were saying the common set of values that you have at your company. And a question from Greg is, how do you activate purpose across your organization? How do you consistently hold people accountable to those set of values? And how do you, maintain that top level of best places to work? Any practical tips or anything you can say about that?
Yeah, so I would say a few things. The first thing, which may seem small or cheeky or whatever, but really matters, is no one believes you until you fire everybody who lies, right? And so if somebody lies in our company, not makes a mistake, and I didn't realize that was true and that kind of thing, but actually lies, whether and particularly if they're a great performer. The moment they lie knowingly, you got to fire them. And I, not like have the 90-day, what all that nonsense. you just gotta, like, you can't be in our company. Those were the rules. We said those are the rules. So that's the first thing. And I think that's a more powerful idea than people realize. Like, they're like, oh, no matter how good you are, if you don't tell the truth or whatever, you're not gonna be here. And then the second thing is, this is actually one thing as I'm thinking about, like, that Jack Welch used to teach, that, there's this quadrant of like low performer, high performer, and then the part of the quadrant is low cultural fit, high cultural fit. And so the thing is that people have a hard time acting on the high performer, low cultural fit. They're like afraid, and you got to be ruthless about that. You have to realize that that the high performer, low cultural fit is like having cancer in your company. So, and a lot of times, people just don't know. Like, I've had an example of someone who came from a very command and control school district, and was there for years, and she started to behave in a command and control way with us, and she didn't even know she was doing it. And but her peers were able in a very healthy way to be like, that's just not how we do things here. And so, if the values are strong enough where there's a peer relationship, like, that's not going to work here. We don't allow for that. And that was, she didn't really realize it. And it's so different because she's used to telling people what to do. And so there are times where, now she's embraced those things and her performance has improved, and it can correct. So there's a few thoughts, but it's hard stuff, and you don't get it right, and it's sloppy.
Yeah, well, leadership is not always easy, right?
Yeah.
Another question from Greg: what types of things, other than kids' sports examples, do you seek when interviewing team members? Do you have a checklist, or is it more of a gut?
Well, I can't give all the secrets away, but I would say that among the things I look for, but when I ask, what's gone well and not gone well, I look a lot for like victim speak, villain speak. Like, these things, greatness usually comes by people who say, these things happened by me. I feel accountable for these things. I feel like I can influence these things. And if in the interview I hear a lot of these things happen to me, if you hear too much of that, you have someone who might not lead well in our organization. And so that can come up sometimes with stories of I'll give you the younger person version. I kind of stopped interviewing, and I don't mean to not be polite, but I kind of stopped interviewing at Harvard and Stanford because and we have a lot of those graduates in our company, but with the newer graduates, I would ask, like, tell me about a time you used constructive feedback effectively. And I just kept getting, well, I was told I wasn't good at the following, but it turned out the professor was not popular or mean, or like it was, they told me I wasn't great because of something wrong with them. I can't do this anymore. I mean, you can't, like, you have to be someone who's totally dedicated to learning, to be in a fast growth company and understand you have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to learn. We're going to learn a lot from you. But when it starts to be like, when I'm not good, I am the victim to the thing that happened to me. And I spend a ton of time sniffing that out. And I love to see someone who's, what I'll call a competitive learner. Like, I did a role play once with a person who's now vice president, and she came from the education community. I wanted to see if she could sell or persuade people to do something. And I gave her a role play, and she was terrible. And after about 2 minutes, she looked at me. She's like, I didn't do well. So well, did I? And I'm like, no, that wasn't very good. And she said, I want to do it again. I want you to let me try again. I'm like, you're hired. I don't care whether she stinks now, but like in the middle of the interview, gets out, says I stinks, but still wants to come back at me. And she's been one of the greatest blessings of our company because of that willingness in the moment to have the confidence to be like, I want to try again because I know I stink. Like, okay, you're in, you're coming to the company. And by the way, the second one wasn't that good either. But I knew we had somebody special.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here today. We are at time. I know we have a ton of questions in the chat that we didn't get to. Apologize that we don't have another hour here with you two, but I just want to thank you, Rob and Raj, for your time today and sharing your story, sharing more about your values and higher purpose in your organizations. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. I did drop a link to a very, very brief survey. We would love to get your feedback if you have a moment to let us know what you think about our programming here. It will help us for the future. We look forward to seeing all of you again at a future event.
And Kim, real quick, thank you and Raj for both your Conscious Capitalism organization, and Raj, your great academic work and speaking and so forth, what you guys are doing for the world. It matters a ton. It's inspired our company and our team and others, and we just want to thank you for who you are.
Great.
Well, thank you. Thank you for exemplifying all of these things.
Yes, thank you.
All right, have a good day.
Everybody enjoy their day and have a wonderful week. Thanks
Bye-bye.
again.
That's all. Take care. Bye-bye.